We're here today with General John Wakelin. John, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking time out of your day. Appreciate having you. For the audience, why don't you kind of introduce yourself, what you're doing today, and just a brief history of where you've been.
Well, you call me General John Wakelin. My kids don't call me that anymore. So, but I spent 30 years in the Army, and after that, I had 3 kids in college at the same time, and I needed another job, so I went to work here in San Diego for SAIC, which just split into 2 other companies, SAIC and Leidos, and now I'm working for them as a program manager running an Army research laboratory contract where they put a lot of delivery orders through it.
Take us back. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? How did you get before you started your 30 years in the Army?
Well, I grew up in San Francisco.
Okay.
I'm a product of a father who lost his first marriage because of alcoholism and gambling, and he met my mother, who was an orphan from Genoa, Italy.
Oh.
Came to this country as an indentured servant,
Really?
working for a Jewish family at Fort Lee, New Jersey, which is the anchor for the George Washington Bridge, which Governor Christie of New Jersey is having a lot of fun with right now. And so she worked there, and by the grace of God, migrated across the United States in about 1928 and ended up in Santa Barbara, where my father was coming off of this destroyed first marriage, and he was a very glib, aristocratic Englishman that liked, I'm not sure if it was Scotch, but he liked stout.
Mm-hmm.
And that one year he didn't drink, and he convinced my mother that they should get together. They had a girl who was my sister, who was a nun in the Catholic Church up in San Jose. And then in 1936 I was born. But my father was an Anglican, and he was of the mind that the children should select their own religion.
Okay.
So my mother, who only had a 6th grade education, finally had enough gumption, and she was now married to a divorced man and couldn't receive the sacraments. She finally drugged myself and my sister down to St. Mary's Cathedral in San Francisco, and I was 6, my sister was 11, and on the old-style churches, they had a big downstairs, and the cathedral was on top of it. I was there at 6 years of age, and she knocked on these gigantic oak doors, and the doors opened up, and I looked up, and I saw the largest penguin I've ever seen in my life, and that was Sister Cecilia, all in black with a white top. And my mother says, "I'm Maria Wakelin. I want my children to be baptized Catholic." From that, went on to entering the church, went to Sacred Heart High School and then University of San Francisco, and left there. And in those days, you had to join the military because of the draft, and
Okay.
came into the Army, went to Germany, and 30 years later retired on the Joint Chief of Staff in Washington, D.C. Came out here to find that job to support my kids.
Gotcha. So let's go back. You mentioned, because I know the faith is important to you, because I know you from seeing you at daily mass primarily, outside of some other ways. So how did that transpire? Like just having your mom take you that one time, from then on, it's been...
Well, I think it's like a lot of young guys. I got hooked into the Holy Family Sisters, which my sister eventually joined that order.
Okay.
And they did sacristy care and also teaching. Even before it was called CCD, they had after school classes, and there was a friendly priest there that said he needed altar servers, and so he kind of convinced me I should be an altar server, and that just kept going in my life. And
Gotcha.
and going to Sacred Heart High School was really not a tremendous spiritual thing, but it was something I could still identify with Catholic Church and going to Mass.
Gotcha. So a lot of your formation then wasn't even from your mom, it's from the sisters and...
Yeah, but my mother really, well, she had inspiration to get us into the church.
Mm-hmm.
And again, my father died when I was 17, and my one great blessing I had at that time was I could go to communion, but my mother couldn't. So upon my father's death, I wrote out the act of contrition. I took my mother down to St. Mary's Cathedral, and I said, "Mom, you're going to confession." I shoved her into the confessional. And you just talk to the priest, and when you get done, tell God that you're sorry for your sins, and we can go to Mass together.
Wow. That had to be a pretty
But she was
powerful
very,
moment.
she was a very good moral woman, although she met my father on the rebound and didn't really have that great a formation herself, but she knew that she had to stay close to Jesus, and she wanted her kids to be close to Jesus.
Oh, that's impressive. So you basically get done with school and you have no choice but to join the Army? Or is that?
Well, you're right. What they called, it was they called you a volunteer. I'll have to get the right term, but you had to serve 2 years on active duty, because I took ROTC, which is a Reserve Officer Training Corps, and I came in as a second lieutenant and had to serve 2 years active duty. And I got sent to Germany and met a lot of great people in the military. I loved the military because up until just recently, it was a very moral organization with a lot of integrity.
Right.
In fact, it's built on integrity and basically follows the 10 Commandments. At least it did follow the 10 Commandments. And I found a lot of great people who weren't in that profession to make money. It was to serve their country. And so it wasn't a profit-motivated organization. So people cared about everybody, and if somebody was in trouble or hurt or wounded, everybody would come together to help take care of that family or support them in their need.
So when you joined, did you assume, okay, I'll do my 2 years and I'll be done and go do something else?
Exactly. I that was it. I was going to go in the military for 2 years, go back to San Francisco and work in the corner grocery store where I worked for 12 years. And but by the grace of God, I met a lot of other good folks there, and they said, "Hey, why don't you make a career out of it?" I said, "I'm not sure if I want to do that." They said, "Oh, just apply for regular Army." I don't know if you know, they have reserve active duty people. In the old days, they had regular Army people, and so I did apply, and they offered me a commission in the regular Army. And when I went before a board of officers, they said, "Well, are you going to make this a 30-year career?" And I said, "I can't guarantee you that, but I'll at least sign up for 3 years, and it's your job to keep me in the Army. It's not my job to continue to sell myself on the Army."
And was it really then that whole notion that you were surrounded by people that were serving versus looking for making a quick buck that
Exactly
kept you
it. I mean, they cared about you. The guy who talked me into going to the regular Army became a tremendous friend, probably the bravest and toughest man I've ever met. And he became like a father figure because my father, like I said, died. My father died when I was 17, but this guy was always, "Hey, John, how you doing? What's your next move? Where you going?" And I think that's something that's missing in our life today, people that don't have the time to mentor other people.
Yeah.
So that kept me in until I decided that I better look for another job.
So at some point you must have had these children you needed to get the other job for. So
Right.
walk us through your kind of military and meeting your wife scenario.
Well, again, I met my wife. I was in the military about 5 or 6 years, and again, loved the Army, but didn't really know where I was going to go in a career, because when if you're only taking care of yourself, you're not really sure why you're doing that. And but by the grace of God, I was assigned to a school in New York. In the military, since I've been in communications, they wanted you to get involved with stuff like AT&T and where AT&T was going, so they gave us 1 year with industry. And where I was assigned was to go work with New York Telephone and the long lines, which was the long haul part of AT&T in New York. And So I had to rent, another guy and I had to find a place to live in New York. So we put an ad in the New York Times and the Long Island Press and said wanted a 2-bedroom house or apartment, and put those ads, and found out that my future wife, Jan's mother, answered the ad. She said, I'm not sure who you guys are, but I'd like to meet you. He said, we have this 7-room house, and there's a bar in the basement, and that kind of turned us on right away that there might be a future for there. So we rented her house, and a long story later, I ended up marrying the landlord and landlady's daughter. But God was testing us, and so my next assignment was in going to Korea, leaving there, and we had a definite attraction. She was going to start college, and I was going to Korea, and it was be more than a 12-month assignment. It stretched out to be 13 or 14 months. And so I was like, see what happens, God. And by the grace of God, I got assigned to West Point. Not a grad from West Point, but they wanted some outside influence because they called it, they had some cheating scandal at West Point, which they thought they could correct by keeping West Pointers from teaching West Pointers.
Oh, okay.
So they brought somebody that had other affiliation. And by the grace of God, I got assigned 55 miles away from where Jan lived, and we're able to meet again and see where God wanted us to go.
So this was after you went to Korea and came back?
Came back.
Nice. Now, was she Catholic as well? Or?
Oh yeah, but again, she had her problems. Her mother and father are Lithuanian, and her father was a Knights of Columbus, but that was about the only thing he did about the church. Mm-hmm. He liked the camaraderie, so he ended up not going to church. But since her mother did get married in the Catholic Church, although she didn't really know she was a Catholic, but she knew that she should help raise the children Catholic. So she took Jan and her sister and brother to Mass, or got them to church and got them to the Catholic school. And so I met Jan. She was probably she was the only one that was going to church. Her brother was younger, and her sister was off married. So we knew we were Catholic, and not that I was rigid. I was only
Right.
going to marry a Catholic, but
Right.
by the grace of God, came back to West Point, and everything started to gel together after that.
So how long after that did you guys get married?
About a year.
Okay. And then how quickly did children enter the picture?
Well, we wanted children right off the bat, and it was, just that's the whole thing. You get married, you got to have children.
Mm-hmm.
It's not anything. I had already had a career, and Jan didn't, but she was really ready for children. But again, as God gives you all these other challenges, my mother was very aged at that time. She lived in San Francisco. When I came back from Korea, I saw that she was not doing very well, so I took her to West Point, but got a little apartment. So she lived with me, and when we got married, my wife says, well, she can't make it by her own. So as a young bride, we had my mother live with us. And then we started having 2 children, and we can say that both of those children have birth certificates signed by the superintendent of West Point.
Nice.
So John and Jenny are both have birth certificates from West Point.
So talk a little bit about having your mom live with you, because I think it's one of the things that I know for me, like, I feel like it's a huge loss for our culture in many ways, that so often we're just pushing our parents out. And, sometimes I think it's partially, pride on their part of not wanting to be a burden, and partially it's just our own selfishness. But, talk about that experience, because obviously it's a challenge, but I'm assuming there were some rewarding aspects of it as well.
Well, it was very difficult on a young bride like my wife, but she was very dedicated to trying to be a good wife and pull up her side of the arrangement. And so it was difficult, because my mother started to get something that they now call Alzheimer's. It wasn't. They called it hardening of the arteries, or they didn't even call it dementia. So she did become a challenge to both of us. But again, you know, God gives you enough grace to get over these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like having another child at home. But Jan responded to taking basically care of her, and we could take her to Mass and let her continue in the sacraments. And then when she really got extremely bad, God took her through the great friend of the old, which is pneumonia. But again, it was just another opportunity to see the grace of God, because they wouldn't let her stay at West Point Hospital because they, you know, that's for the, not to say they're draconian. They just said, hey, we'll let her stay there for 30 days, but after that, you're going to have to find a home for her.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on orders eventually to go to Vietnam, and the Catholic priest there, who was very nice, said, you can't leave your wife with your mother and those 2 small children. You're going to have to find a home for her. So I tried to do that and took her down to a Catholic organization, and when they found out that she wasn't ambulatory, that I'd bring her in a wheelchair, the nun said, I'm sorry, if she was able to take care of herself, we'd take her for life. And being a pretty dedicated Catholic, I was really kind of destroyed. So I called up my sister, who's a nun out in San Francisco. I said, hey, what are we going to do with Mom? And she said, let me call the Sisters of the Poor, who are in the news right now because
Mm-hmm.
of their lawsuit with
Yep.
the Obamacare. And I talked to the nun there. She says, we don't care what shape your mother's in. Get her in an airplane, bring her out here, and we'll take care of her for the rest of her life. So that gave me a great amount of solace. Started to make arrangements for that, but she ended up having pneumonia. They sent her to St. Albans Hospital, a Navy hospital down by Brooklyn, which was another chore to run down and see her, but the people down there were just wonderful. The patients were wonderful, the ethnic nurses and care people were just wonderful, and she died there after about 2 weeks. And
Gotcha.
so God took her, and that took care of that situation.
And so then shortly thereafter you went to Vietnam, or?
I went to Vietnam, leaving my wife with 2 small children and having to take care of them. But she had her parents out in Brooklyn, and she went to Long Island,
Okay.
a place called Center Reach. And again, had the opportunity to serve our country over in Vietnam for a little less than a year. Came back, went to the Command and General Staff College, which is in Kansas, and then came out to San Diego. And my wife, being a New Yorker, said, hey, this is really a neat place. If you ever retire.
So now, after Vietnam, did your family always travel with you, or?
That was, you know, I had an assignment in Germany as a bachelor, assignment in Korea as a bachelor, assignment in Vietnam, married, and then we went to Indonesia after that, and that was a 2-year assignment. And after that, it's all stateside after that.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So then you end up back in New York, where?
Well, we ended up in Fort Bragg. Since
Okay.
I was airborne, we ended up at Bragg a lot of times. And again, the communities are fantastic. I mean, they were just, you know, you're on federal property, so you don't feel like you get involved with the states.
Mm-hmm.
And the Catholic community was very tight. And my wife got a chance to teach catechism, and since she was a little bit in modeling, she taught some classes for young girls who are trying to become young women.
Gotcha.
And we did that for a couple of tours, and then again I got selected for general officer, and my whole life changed, and went to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey for 2 years, and then to the Joint Staff in Washington, D.C. and in the Pentagon, and that's where I ended my career.
So talk a little bit about that, like how did your life change? Because one of the things that has always struck me about you is you seem like a very humble guy, and then you realize like how high up you made it in the Army. It seems like a lot of people wouldn't be that humble. Is that?
Well, you learn very quickly you got to be humble, and you don't make any rank in the Army except by the people that work with you and work,
Gotcha.
and work for you, because if you think you can just lead them off a cliff, and people are too smart to do that, they'll either get off your train and go to somebody else's train, or they'll, you really have to get their cooperation, and you do have to exercise leadership. But again, I worked for a lot of great people, and I also had a lot of great people work for me. But it was somewhat your ego does start to say, maybe I am that good. Mm-hmm. And your wife and kids kind of bring you back to reality. Hey, Dad. Mm-hmm. And we had trouble with our oldest son. We adopted a child out here in 73, and he was a challenge, and he kind of disrupted our family. And so he was 18. We were in Virginia. I was working at the Pentagon. And he just told us that he couldn't live in our house because he wanted to do other things, and he thought he could earn his own money. And he stayed close by, but for 10 years he left the church. He thought Jesus Christ and Christianity was a bunch of hooey. Although he'd been to all the great CCD classes, we thought were sticking stuff in his head. So 10 years, my wife and I prayed to the Sacred Heart of Jesus that he'd come back to the church. And one day when he was 28, and one of my birthdays, he flew out to celebrate my birthday. And we were at St. Michael's, and he never went to Mass with us, but he decided to go to church with us. And we're sitting in St. Michael's here in Poway, and we're in almost the front row. My son, we started to get up for communion. My son gets up. He's taller than I am, and my wife and I just go into shock because we weren't sure what he was doing, but we also weren't sure if he's going up to receive the Blessed Sacrament. Has he been to confession? Mm-hmm. He goes up and receives communion, never says anything. And we were crying in the pews because God bless him. But he didn't come back that strong, but we were so happy he was at least going that direction. But he ended up meeting a girl in his job back in Virginia, and she told him that she wouldn't date him because he's a skydiver, and she didn't want to have him killed. And so he says, well, I love it. It's a great sport. People are, great camaraderie. There's no drugs and booze before you jump, but there is afterwards. Mm-hmm. So she says, well, I'm sorry, I can't date you. But they were close by, and after a few months, one day John's on the DZ, the drop zone, and he looks down and who's that? And it's Kelly, his girlfriend. He said, what are you doing down here? He said, well, I felt that if I can't get you to stop, I might as well join you. So she started taking skydiving lessons, and John's got 1,100 jumps. His wife has a couple hundred. Wow. And they've jumped off of everything, B-17 bombers through the bomb bay doors. He's climbed towers and jumped, free basing, not free basing, base jumping, and drove us crazy because he started having kids. But the thing that changed his life is what really changed his life dramatically was when he was going to get married at the age of 35, and he told Kelly, his fiancée, well, we're going to get married, we better get married in a Catholic church because I don't think Mom and Dad are going to come to the wedding. Mm-hmm. So they went to Arlington, Virginia, to a very Orthodox parish, talked to the priest about pre-Cana, and the priest says, okay, before you start, I want to give you this tape. It's called Contraception, Why Not? Done by Dr. Janet Smith, and said, listen to this tape and then come back for your next get together with me. So they threw it into the car and drove to her condo, and they're listening most of the tape, and it's about an hour long, and he said, well, let's just finish the tape here in a parking lot. So after that, I get a call. Hey, Dad. I said, what, John? He said, I'm here with Kelly. We just listened to this tape by Dr. Janet Smith, Contraception, Why Not? He said, do you believe this stuff? I said, what are you talking about? And he explained it to me. And he said, Dr. Janet Smith says that you got to be chaste. And the reason you conceive children because you're joining with God in creating a human being, and God infuses a soul in that human being that never existed before, and that soul exists forever. He's why I was like, yeah, I believe that. And he said, yeah, but she also says that soul changes the universe. I didn't tell you, but my son never finished college. He got into drugs, marijuana, cocaine. But by the grace of God, he got out of that. And he basically self-taught himself physics. He knows quantum theory, black holes. He'll discuss with anybody. But he says, you know, when she says that soul changes the universe, that goes against the third law of thermodynamics, which nothing new enters the universe.
Mm-hmm.
He said, do you believe that, Dad? I never really thought about it, but yeah, I do. He says, well, I do too.
Wow.
And that changed his life.
That's amazing.
And now he can argue with anybody.
About action.
And he's also so pro-life that he says you can't be pro-life unless you're pro-gun. That turned his life, that tape, and I give a lot of the, and in the end of that little story, John says, yeah, I believe what Dr. Janet Smith says. He says, I bought 100 of those tapes and I'm giving them out on the drop zone.
Oh, wow.
And if you've ever gone down to a drop zone, the people down there are really interesting people, but they're different people.
Mm-hmm. So you've talked about a couple. How many children do you have total?
5.
Okay. And one is adopted.
One is adopted, and that's Scott. They have 2 of our grandchildren. John has 5 of our grandchildren. Our other daughter, who lives here in San Diego, San Marcos, is Heather. And they have 5 of our grandchildren. And another daughter has 2 in Florida. So we have 14 grandchildren.
Gotcha. It's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and we still have a daughter who's 35 years of age, and she's looking and we're looking if we can ever find that next good guy for her.
Gotcha. So did the rest of them, again, you know, well, first of all, the 10 years where your son is away from the faith, was that extremely stressing for you? Is it worse for your wife? Like, what is that experience?
It was very
like?
stressful.
Yeah.
And another dumb thing I did, besides buying him that dirt bike, when he needed a car, when I was on the joint staff and very busy, I bought him an SVO Mustang.
Wow.
SVO Mustang is a special vehicle operation, 4 cylinders, but the cylinders are very big.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a used car, but it would, I don't know how many G's you could pull in it, but when you step on the accelerator, it slaps you up against the back seat.
Mm-hmm.
It takes you a while to get off of it. And my son says, I gotta have that car. And again, being a dumb father and not consulting with my wife, I bought it for him. And that cost him his license, that cost him his insurance, that cost him everything, because he went through so many superchargers, and it cost me a lot of money too, but trying to help him repair the thing. But he eventually rolled it and continued on his motorcycle. But
so did the rest of your children, have they all stayed with the faith pretty strongly, or?
the girls have stayed with the faith very strongly. Scott, God bless him, he's really, now that he has 2 children, and he married a young lady who doesn't have Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
Her parents are Muslims. He's having a challenge of trying to raise his children, who are basically 4 and 6.
Gotcha.
Taking them to church. His wife doesn't attend Mass with him, but we're trying to nudge her in that direction. But it's very difficult when she has a mother who's prays 5 times a day,
Mm-hmm.
and very religious in her own faith.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
she doesn't have my daughter-in-law doesn't have a great affinity for the religion.
Gotcha. So what brought you out to San Diego then? How did you?
Well, basically, my wife said it'd be a nice place to go to. There's no snow out here, and she lived here for a couple of years. And we didn't want to go to San Francisco for the obvious reasons, and I grew up there. I love the city, but I think it has its challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And we still had a daughter who was 10 years of age and needed to go to a good school, and we found the school system in Poway to be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came out here, and I got a job at SAIC. And my wife, by the grace of God, again, never finished her college education, so she went to Christian Heritage College and finished it.
So, and now you still work at SAIC that you came out here for?
I work at SAIC, but in September we split to SAIC and Leidos. I work in the Leidos, which is the R&D side of what Bob Beister started 40 years ago.
Okay. And so what keeps you working? What keeps you excited?
Young people like you and the two other folks in here.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, I really believe that God has given us the ability to solve almost all the, well, with His grace, all the problems that we have. And I'm just so impressed with people that can come up with these futuristic answers to whatever the problem is. And definitely it's not having less children or keeping your affection with cats and dogs. It's with human beings. They can think, make decisions, and solve problems. And it's fascinating to me that they're like my son, that they can come up with solutions to almost anything.
And that's a lot of what happens at SAIC, is working with those types of people?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of mundane things, but we also do some really, I'm not in all of them, but in some high-skilled areas, solving problems. We got people in Afghanistan, we have people in Iraq, we have people down South America, we have people here in San Diego that have some neat things. And although we all like to make money, I think the great challenge is the solutions. In fact, that's what Bob Beister had as the motto of the old SAIC's. Well, they called it an employee-owned company then, and it was science to solutions, or solutions through science. And they are solutions to everything. And to just take the easy way out and saying, well, we're going to ration water, or we're going to ration this, or we're not going to have any more kids is I want to say it, it's the dumb way, because God has given us this great intellect to solve the problems. And with that and prayer, we can do it. And I think if, and not trying to, if you're not willing to just sit back and say, hey, I solved the problem, but put it to the team, listen to other people's ideas, I think we can do it. So that's what keeps me going.
Gotcha.
My wife would like me to retire, but.
And are there any plans like that, anything big on the horizon for you and your family coming up, or?
Well, like I said, you got to plan for the future. I just hit 78 on Sunday.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you. And you got to start preparing for when I become like my mother and living with one of my kids. And my son has a place in West Virginia. We'd like to build an adjunct to that so we could have a place that we want to do and try and same in site at San Marcos. But I think that's my future for my wife and I.
Gotcha.
Like to get our daughter married, but that's in God's hands.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's great, John. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to me.
I got a small gift for you here. I'm going to screw up the cameras, but in one of our emails you mentioned you loved Scotch, so we got you a nice bottle of Scotch for joining us. So
well, thank you. I know Bobby Graves will
help you
with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.